Hello everyone, this is Frank DeFreitas and welcome to HoloTalk, the Internet's laser and holography talk show, enjoyed in over 42 countries throughout the world. And now, here's this week's show.
Hello?
Alan, how are you? It's Frank DeFreitas.
Hi, Frank. How are you?
Doing good.
Excellent.
How are you set to do our show tonight?
I think I'm pretty good.
That's good.
I was looking through stuff here. Unfortunately, I do so many things that I become very quickly. I forget what I'm. So many projects going at once.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm up for it. If it's a good time for you.
It's a great time for me.
Excellent.
The rain just turned to freezing rain up here, so might as well just sit back and take it easy because I don't think anybody's going anywhere tonight.
Excellent.
Yeah. I was on your website today.
Yes.
And I think the listeners are going to be very interested in what you have to offer to them. And why don't we start off by you telling us basically what brought this idea about, how you got involved with doing something like this in the first place, because from what I understand, your background's a little bit different than holography. What was the interest in holography and putting this computer-generated hologram program together?
Sure. I'd love to talk about that. I have an electronics and a computer type background, and I've always had an interest in technical things, engineering. Mm-hmm. And it's as a technical person, it's hard not to come across holography and say, "Wow, that's pretty darn interesting." So when I was back as an undergrad, actually at the University of Pennsylvania, I was fortunate enough to be involved in a research lab that had some, at the time, fast computers. They were microvax computers, which by today's standards are probably about that equivalent to a 386, very old top computers. But I was looking for interesting things to do, and I said, well, I had previously actually as a junior high student, I had made made a single hologram with a helium neon laser as a science fair project. And I thought that was just, neat as anything.
Where did you make that at?
Well, I made that I actually made it at the University of Pennsylvania because I didn't have a helium neon laser, so I went over to the David Rittenhouse Labs as a junior high student, and they loaned me I think it was probably a 0.5 milliwatt helium neon laser.
Okay.
And they're in a closet. I brought my inner tube in and a box of sand, and I was holed up in a closet. And in between classes, because as the students go from floor to floor, there's a lot of motion. Yeah. But in between, I was actually able to get some interference fringes. Not a great hologram, but enough to prove to myself that there was something there. And on a piece of black and white film, here I had a rainbow pattern.
Yeah.
So that was I thought fascinating. So when I became an undergrad, I was in this laboratory. I said, well, you need to be able to use these fast computers to generate a hologram if possible. And I read around in the research, and in fact, people at IBM, there is, from the early days of computers, people had been trying to generate interference fringes and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I just, I gave it a shot. I wrote a program at the time written in C, and we had an old DEC, a Digital Equipment Corporation, LNO3 laser printer. It was an early laser printer. And it was at, I think, probably about 150 dots per inch. But it took me, some time. I wrote drivers for that. And it took, for the first image, it took me probably about 3 weeks of microvax time. A single program running for 3 weeks. And at the end of that, though, I was actually able to make a hologram. I printed it out on the laser printer. And I actually printed 9 sheets, and then I sent it up to the photographic lab, and I had them reduce that onto 35 millimeter film.
Oh, okay.
Because that was how, at the time, 150 dots per inch is not particularly high resolution for a laser printer. Mm-hmm. And it's really not enough to get a good use as a diffraction pattern. But with the photographic resolution, I was actually able to generate fringes and prove that the technique worked.
Wow.
So that's at the time that was the late 80s, and I received some small undergraduate grants just to work on that. And in fact, it was published in I think 1991 in the journal called Computers and Physics.
Okay.
I have something very very closely related to the program that's on my website.
That's not a magazine found on the newsstands usually.
No, that's not. That's a journal. I think it's Elsevier Press. That's a scientific journal. But in fact, most of that. The equation, it all boils down to the diffraction equation, which is on the website there. It's very very similar to what you'd find in a standard physics book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now it's running in Java.
Yes. So that was here it is more than 10 years later, and I've gone through many other projects. I'm still very interested in computers and numerical simulations and things of that nature. But at the time I wrote it, it was in C, and it was a very esoteric application. You really had to be only I could run it. Computer programmers have a tendency to write things for themselves, but there's a big movement with open source software.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's a very nice thing. That's basically where an individual writes software, but they write it if they write it for themselves so that they can use it themselves. They release it so that maybe someone else can learn from it and also make some use out of it.
I think there's a browser out there. What is it, Firefox or something like that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Firefox and Mozilla are two very very popular projects for browsers. And then there's the whole Linux operating system, which is a competitor to some of the other operating systems. And that's also not only free, but it's also open source, meaning that anyone can take that, add on to it, and then release it so that other people can use it also. Yeah. And the only restriction is that the same privileges that you have, the same rights that you have when you get the source code, you have to pass that on to someone else. Mm-hmm. But that's very much in the nature of academia.
Yeah, that's exactly what the net was at one time.
Exactly, sharing of information.
Yeah.
Yes. So I had the idea, and last year I actually had a little bit of free time. I thought, well, it'd be neat to see how laser printers have progressed and how computers have developed. What this would be like written in Java, where Java is not a particularly efficient. It's a reasonable computer language. There are some computer science people sometimes debate the merits or demerits of the language, but it's a very very nice language to program in from an object-oriented standpoint. You can actually you can simulate light, for instance, very easily as a complex wave. My initial simulation, just through limitations of my own knowledge and of the language, I simulated as it was a real valued simulation. I simulated light basically as a cosine wave.
Okay.
And now it's a light really is not light we model it through an imaginary term. And so it took me a few weeks to rewrite this, but I've rewritten in Java, and the same simulation that took me 3 weeks of microvax time now runs on a 700 megahertz computer, which is by today's standards is not particularly fast. Yeah. Runs in under a minute.
Wow.
And it's remarkable how fast how far our technology's come.
Yeah, and that computer could probably be purchased on eBay for $100 or less now.
That's right, exactly. I can only imagine, in another couple of years, what will be, almost real-time holography.
Yeah, well, I've heard that I haven't been really keeping up with a lot of this, but I've heard that one of the new Mac G5s actually has the first liquid-cooled chip for a consumer machine.
Really?
Yeah.
It is amazing our computer technology. What was a mainframe years ago. I actually did have the good fortune to work in high school. I went out to Los Alamos labs and worked on some simulations out there. And
wow, that is an opportunity for a high school student.
Exactly. I was very very lucky to do that. And they had a supercomputer, and we were generating fractals. Of course, that was a lot of power. You have to think, how to use that much power. But now, the same power that we had there on a Cray is available today on a Pentium 4. It's really amazing.
Yeah. Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Cherry Hill West.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did my undergrad at University of Pennsylvania in electrical engineering, and then I actually completed the MD and the PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. We actually lived close to one another, which I think we spoke about one time before when we did a call a while ago. Because for a while I was in Barrington, New Jersey, and Belmar. I was walking distance to Edmond Scientific.
That's a fantastic opportunity. Back in the heyday. I'm sure you made good use of the.
I certainly did.
Use of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still go over because they still have a shop there. And,
I remember you saying that.
Exactly. It actually is good. They do sell surplus there, and they do have a full a lot of the optics. Still, you can get first surface mirrors and things of that nature for a very reasonable price.
Yeah.
If you have some idea of what you're looking for.
Well, I don't know if you remember or not, or what your age is. I know in your email you said you were putting your kids to bed, so I guess you're probably a lot younger than I am. I don't know if you remember back when Edmund Scientific was involved with the psychedelic light shows.
I do remember that vaguely.
And they had that light show theater.
Yes.
In the 60s, back when everything was psychedelic and it got a Davida Iron Butterfly type of thing. And they supplied a lot of the light shows to the traveling bands when they were doing their concerts back in the 60s with all these special effects that would be on the screen with like the bubbles and the turning wheels and things like that.
Right,
and they used to give those shows on a regular basis throughout the day. And that's when I saw my first hologram, was in 1968. You used to have to walk in the back, it's back where they have like last time I was down there was actually a warehouse part, where it was just all kinds of stuff thrown into cabinets and things like that. You can just go through and buy what you want. But that's where the light show took place, and it was actually around the theater. And as you walked around the theater to go into the door on the other side, they had little things that you could look in on your way around, and they had some holograms on exhibit. I think laser transmission hologram of a couple chess pieces or something like that. And that was just it for me.
That's amazing what a fortunate start that it was so close, and you had the opportunity to do it. I'm sure that at the time, the holograms are a little. They're not something you come by all the time.
Yeah, especially in '68.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about let's say average Joe or average Jane. They want to download this program. Perhaps they're a hobbyist, maybe they're a student, maybe they're an educator. They want to work with kids in school. Why don't we go through a step-by-step process on what they need to do once they get to your webpage? And I'm going to have a link to your webpage on the HoloTalk page so people can go over. And from what I understand, they can download this. Is it called a Java application? Is that what it is?
That's correct. The program itself is written in Java, which means that to run that, let me just say a word about Java. Java is a virtual machine, and the advantage of Java, the reason I chose it for that, aside from being a fairly recent language and benefiting from a lot of computer science over the years, is that a program written in Java should, in theory, run on any machine, and be that a Unix-based system, a Windows-based system, or a Macintosh system.
Yeah.
But the way that it works is that you actually have to download the Java virtual machine, also called the Java runtime, first. As soon as you get that program on your computer, you can then run any program written in Java.
Okay.
So the first thing to do would be and all these are from the webpage. There are links to these various programs. There's a link to java.sun.com, which is where you would get the virtual machine.
Okay.
And there's also some instructions for Macintosh users. I think with OS X, the most recent version of the operating system, it should actually have Java built in.
Yeah. And there's a Macintosh runtime Java that is also included in Mac operating system 9, but I'm not quite sure if it's compatible with one of the engines that you have or not.
That could be. One of the I should note that for a while Microsoft was including a version of Java with their operating system, but unfortunately it was not a version of Java that was really useful. It actually was a bit of a broken version. So what I would suggest to anyone is that if you take a look at the site, you can see developer.apple.com has some information about Java on the Mac, and java.sun.com has information about Java on the PC or on Unix.
Yeah.
I would hope that through those, an individual could get Java running on their system. Once they get that, and they don't need Java comes in two flavors, the runtime, which is what you need to run a program, and there's also something much, much larger called the software development kit. That's only really used for programmers, so it won't hurt anything, but if an individual, it does take up more space and takes significantly more time to download. So that's it's only the runtime is necessary.
Okay. So someone's going to go to your website, they're going to download the necessary components. Once they're on their desktop or on their hard drive, are they self-extracting files with installers?
They are. That's correct. Yes. So, and you should install, Java should be installed, and then it should, there's a test just to make sure that it works. People have taken, Java actually has been around for quite a number of years now, so those are pretty mature.
Okay, so it's basically the same thing as downloading Real Audio Player in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. Once they have it on the machine, they open the application, and then they can set their parameters, which I understand, and from what I was able to read, you have information on that on the web page itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
what I would suggest at that point, after getting Java to work, is you download there's the program, which is called CGH Maker, Computer Generated Hologram Maker .jar. Java programs usually end with a .jar, which is a Java archive. That's what it stands for. That's the actual executable program. So put that in a directory, and then there are also three example data files. One called lettera.gif, one called object.xml, and one called testobject.java.java.
Okay.
And those are samples of different ways of specifying an object to the program that's going to generate the computer-generated hologram.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put all those four files in the same directory, and then you can either double-click on the computer on cghmaker.jar, or you can run it from the command line. That's on the site. I specify how to do that. There's a syntax specified on the site. All it does is give Java a little bit more memory to work with.
Okay, yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Because of course we're going to be doing a lot of calculations. These are scientific calculations in Java. It's actually analogous to ray tracing, and it's going to start. If you consider how many photons are involved when making a hologram, there are quite a number of photons tracing quite a number of paths.
Oh yeah.
And essentially, what we're doing is modeling all of the interaction of every single photon that leaves the laser, bounces off an object, and then returns to the plate in some fashion. We have to track the interference of all these different photons. So you can imagine that's going to take a significant amount of time and certainly of memory.
Yeah, I think there was a company, Aerodyne Research or something. This goes back a long time, so my memory may be fading on this, but I believe it took them close to 72 hours to, for lack of a better term, print out a 1-inch by 1-inch computer-generated hologram at the time.
I can easily believe that.
Yeah.
The displaying a hologram unfortunately, is going to be another sticking point here. Calculating a hologram. Fortunately, our technology has improved much. So what did take weeks of runtime on an old computer, we can do in minutes nowadays. But after that, we're going to get these interference fringes, and we're going to need to be able to transfer that onto something and analogous to the photographic plate that you would use in real holography.
Mm-hmm.
So if an individual downloads the program, shall I walk through an example of using the program?
Please do.
Okay. The first thing to do, I have 4 examples listed on the website. The first example is probably the most important one, and that's just to make sure that things work. If you download the program and run the jar file, you should get a frame similar to what is displayed on the website, which is the control interface. On there's a box called diffraction grading. If you click that box, you'll notice some of the other options turn gray because they're irrelevant at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But what this is going to do is this is going to essentially generate a diffraction grading for us, a sequence of vertical lines, and it's going to allow us to test our overall system, to test whether the program works, whether we can generate some vertical lines on the output device, whether we can print that to a laser printer, and then when we shine a laser through it, we can see the diffraction spots on our projection screen, and we can actually measure those to figure out, just to make sure, and even do calculations just to confirm the resolution of our output device.
It's like a resolution check, in a sense.
That's exactly what it is. And it's critical because the quality of the image that we're going to get is going to be directly related to the resolution of our output device. In this case, I was trying to use a laser printer to show that while more than 10 years ago I needed to print it on a laser printer and then photographically reduce it onto 35 millimeter film to get an image, now I can actually just print it on a laser printer and shine a laser through it. I'll turn it on the transparency, and that's enough to get diffraction fringes. When you
mention laser printer, is that laser printer only, or can this be one of the higher quality inkjets as well?
Well, I have not tried it on an inkjet, and I would love to hear the results if someone does get a chance to do that. I think that it's basically related to the resolution of your output device. So if your inkjets are 600 dots per inch or higher, and they actually make clean dots, then in theory that should actually work.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And if anyone does have access to a slide printer directly from a computer, I think you should have fantastic results with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
okay.
The one other thing to know on the diffraction grating experiment here is what you would do is you would check diffraction grating, and there's a box next to it which is related to the order of diffraction grating. If you just leave that at 1, which is the default, and you hit start computation, you'll notice at the bottom it will under the status it will say that it's generating diffraction grating, and then a couple of seconds later it'll say that it's finished. The status will change to stopped.
Mm-hmm.
There's a box called display output. If you click that, you will get a window that pops up, and that actually has should have vertical lines on it. And the vertical lines are the spacing in between the lines is 1, meaning that every other line is the lines alternately are white and black.
Yeah.
Which would be the highest resolution. That would be our resolution test.
And that's essentially you're going to print out directly from that illustration that you have on the screen at that point.
Well, what I would suggest, or
save it as a file.
Exactly. It comes up in that frame that comes up. There's an option to save it as a GIF format, a GIF format. If you do that, the reason I would do that is because you can then load it into another program and
like Photoshop.
Exactly. Photoshop would be a fantastic choice there, or any graphics program. What's essential is that the dimensions remain constant on the program. There are. If we go back to the interface, we've specified the resolution in terms of pixels.
Mm-hmm.
And the default is 300 pixels by 300 pixels.
Okay.
If you know that your output device is a 600 dot per inch device, then
true 600 dot.
Exactly.
Not interpolated, right?
And that's essential also.
Yeah.
It is some output devices do play games with the output in an effort to try and make it appear a little better than it really is.
Yeah.
And it is essential that you really have a 600 by 600 or a 1200 dot per inch device. That actually is fairly common. A lot of laser printers now today, even that you can get for between $100 and $200, have 1200 by 1200 dots.
Yeah.
So when you would print it, this 300 by 300 image, you would print as when you on the output should be a half inch by a half inch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to make sure that you get that right, because if, for instance, you print 300 by 300 pixel image as a 1 inch by 1 inch image, then you blow your output resolution.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're always at your maximum output resolution.
And let's just add right here at this point that this is on to transparencies.
That's correct.
You don't, because believe it or not, you'll probably have someone doing it on paper, holding it up, saying, "I'm not seeing anything." It'll happen.
Your results probably won't be as good on paper.
But transparencies.
With the transparencies, not all transparencies are created equal, and you'll notice that some of them, the clarity differs. So it might be worth some time playing around with the different types of transparencies to see which ones give better results.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are not clear, and if you shine a laser pointer through them, you'll actually see that even the undiffracted beam is not of the same quality that you would expect.
Okay, before we go any further, let me ask you this question. So we've created this diffraction grating with the program. We saw our preview image. We were happy with it. We brought it into Photoshop. We made sure all the parameters are correct, and we sent it over to the printer and got our output. Let's just put a wedge in there for a second. I'm just curious about something, and this may be way out in left field, but I'll ask anyway. You know, with these transmission LCD panels, would it be possible to bring one of these images into a transmission LCD panel, which is clear and has very high resolution, and use the image that's on the LCD panel as the actual output where you pass the laser through to get your effect?
That could be done. The difficulty with this is that if we're trying to diffract the laser beam on the basis of just this output, the bandwidth, those LCD panels are much wower resolution. When you consider that ultimately we're trying to get something on the order of holography film, and holography film is amazingly high. You know, you're talking about thousands of lines of resolution.
We're probably looking at 72 lines per inch, I would imagine, on one of those LCD panels, right?
Exactly. And so what that would mean, that although it would work, your image size would be so tiny that you'd never be able to resolve it.
Okay.
But your point is well taken in that there are other types of holograms that people make called Fourier holograms. A Fourier hologram is it's a Fourier transform. You take an object and you do a two-dimensional Fourier transform on your object, and if you then take that pattern and you put it in between two lenses, you shine a laser beam through a lens series to expand the beam, collimated, and maybe you expand it to 2 inches by 2 inches, and then you put it through a panel, one of these panels with a Fourier hologram, and then you put it through the exact opposite lens series to reduce it again. You would actually be able to project an image from that. The goal, what I was trying to do, was trying to simplify it so much that we didn't even need a lens in there. You just shine it through a laser pointer.
Yeah, and it's a great start.
Yeah,
because what you've done will be built upon, I'm sure.
And that's what I'm hoping. That's the philosophy of open source software, is that with this, not only is the program up there, but the source code is up there. If anyone is competent with programming, all of the code is up there for anyone to modify and add to their heart's content. The only thing that I would ask for this is that they pass on that information to someone else to give them the same opportunity.
And I also want to point out to the listeners that this is not going to be a 30 by 40 centimeter hologram of the crown jewels. This very simple images such as letters. I noticed on your website you had a photo of the letters A and B, which was incredible in and of itself. Now, does this image appear within the plane of the transparency, or can you place them with any depth, either in front of the transparency or behind the transparency?
You can place them with, you can actually encode depth in the image.
Okay.
Now, there are 3 methods of specifying the input for this. So far we've talked about the diffraction grating. Beyond the diffraction grating, you can specify you can actually specify a file, and the 3 ways to do that are either as a GIF file, where that one doesn't encodes an object in 2 dimensions but without depth. Or you can there's a way to specify individual points. So if the user just wanted to say, well, I want to put something at coordinate 111 and another dot at 102 and another dot at 103, they could specify the points like that. That's an XML format. XML is both human and machine readable. So if a user takes a look at that, they'll understand it, I think, intuitively, if you take a look at that file in a text editor. And the other way to do that is to do it programmatically. And in the program is the ability to program an object with Java itself. And you don't need to be a hardcore Java programmer. As long as you have a little bit of programming experience, it should be somewhat straightforward with that. And with that, you could program, for instance, the locations for a cube, right? You could specify the edges of a cube, each one having maybe, say, 10 points in each edge. And because the cube has some depth to it, you'd find that if you calculate a hologram with this and then you project it on a wall, you can actually bring the front or the back into focus, not at the same time. It actually, by moving the plane of the reconstruction, either the front or the back would be in focus.
Oh, very interesting.
Or if you viewed it with a point source, you would actually see if there's some depth to it, and you looked at it with your stereo vision, you would actually see in 3 dimensions the cube floating there in space.
Wow, incredible!
So it really is a true hologram.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah.
If I can just make one note about from the diffraction grating experiment.
Sure.
Which is, if one goes back and instead of choosing a diffraction grating order of 1, but you choose something like 16 or 32, what that means is that you're going to have 16 or 32, the way the program is coded, there will be 16 or 32 pixels between phases of the wave going across there. And this gives an opportunity to take a look at the output of the hologram. For the output, right now we kind of skipped over that, but that's actually a key part of of generating the hologram. The computer simulation goes through and models what the wave looks like, what the interference looks like at the standpoint of the photographic plate. The difficulty is that's a complex value. Whereas what we can print on our transparency is actually is a binary value. Actually, it's not even a real value.
Okay.
It's not a grayscale. It's only a black dot or a no dot.
Or no dot. Yeah.
Right. So getting from this complex value, the intensity of the light at the plate, to whether we should put a black dot or no dot there, is actually is not trivial. There's a lot of there are a lot of different ways to do it, and unfortunately, none of them is perfect because real photographic film is actually a much better. At least you have, even though it may not be linear, you have the ability to put shades of gray.
Yes.
On that. Although ultimately, at some point, it does become a binary process with the individual crystals.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yes, true.
But here it's much more crude. So if you run a diffraction grating where the phases change every 32 pixels, and you know that on the program I give many options for the output: real binary, imaginary binary, amplitude, and phase type reconstructions. And those are different methods for converting the intensities at the plate into the output device for printing on the laser printer.
Okay.
So what I would suggest is that users just play around with that. The best way to tell what to actually see what they do, and I have an explanation for this on the website.
Okay.
But the best way to actually see what happens is just to try the same. You don't have to recalculate. You can take the same image and just change the output device, and then click on display output.
Okay.
And you can actually do that sequentially. Try the real binary, try the imaginary binary, and so on and so forth. And then you can actually even take this. What I've done is I take them, create graphic files, then in Photoshop or something like that, put them all together on a transparency, and I can test all of them to see which one works best.
Okay, just gang them up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, right next to each other, and then you just with a laser pointer, just spend a second shining it through each one and see which one works.
Yeah. With the reconstruction, what is most important? The fact that the light would be coherent, or the fact that it would be monochromatic for this? Because the reason why I ask is, there are a number of very narrow bandwidth LEDs that are produced now. I'm wondering if LED could also re-illuminate and reconstruct one of these as well.
Well, and that's a good question. If you were using it as a point source, you could probably use an LED. I certainly wouldn't recommend using a laser pointer. That would be dangerous. But one of these LEDs might work as a point source to view it. For reconstructing a wall, I found that I actually have only had success with using laser pointers.
Okay. Well, you need a beam that's not diverging. Is that correct?
Exactly. It has to be, and that in terms of, it has to be somewhat collimated.
Yeah.
Is there some experience using monochromatic LEDs for reconstruction of holograms?
I know they're becoming more and more popular with reflection holograms for display. I haven't had the opportunity to illuminate any laser transmission holograms with them yet. I've had a more broad band red LED that I've used down here in the lab, and it did a fair job. So I'm imagining that the narrow band LEDs would do an even better job with it.
I think that you're right with that. I have used also some of the super bright LEDs for illuminating reflection holograms, and especially the nice thing about those is you can actually get them with varying degrees of divergence.
Yeah.
So that it would be interesting.
But none of them collimated.
Exactly.
Unless you want to go through the process of setting up your own collimating optics with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the reason I have so many of those different output modalities for this is because in that conversion process of trying to figure out what the complex valued simulation and the values at the photographic plate and how they convert into onto what should be printed by the laser printer or your dot matrix printer if you want to try that. There are one of the problems in that conversion is that you always end up with because that conversion is not perfect. You can't print those gray values. You end up with an artifact, and if you go back to on the website, I have the picture of the A and B
Yeah.
on there. If you notice, there's a lot of noise around it,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not nearly as clean as one would hope. In fact, I would estimate to say most of the laser beam actually goes into generating spots on the wall which detract from the image that you want to see.
Okay.
Right, and that's because that has to do with the artifacts created by this binarization process. The fact that we can only print a white dot or either no dot or a black dot on our transparency.
Mm-hmm.
With that, there's plenty of room for improvement from other contributors. With that, there are ways to fix that. You could put a spatial filter. There's in this technique, there is some axial symmetry. So while you might get your letters, your A and your B, on one side of your undiffracted beam, axially across that, on the other side of the beam, you have a reversed A and B.
Oh, I see.
And you could use a spatial filter to filter that out, but it could probably be done with in terms of the computations also. This is really a simulation of the exact physics. So anything you could do with physics with a real holography system, you can do numerically.
Yeah.
Here.
Wouldn't a spatial filter actually expand the beam too much, though?
Well, that's true. Well, if you put a real spatial filter in here, what you could do is you could actually you could block off. You can actually just block off the conjugate image.
Okay.
On here, and that would get rid of that. That doesn't do anything for the scatter. One of the other problems you get is you get sidebands because if you shine your laser through the diffraction grating, you get your undiffracted beam straight ahead, and then immediately next to that, adjacent to that, on either side, you get your first order diffraction pattern, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you continue, you actually get a second order and a third order, and so on and so forth.
Over distance.
Exactly. As you go farther and farther out from your undiffracted beam.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you get the same effect here, where you tend to get images. You tend to get almost echoes of your image
mm-hmm.
as you go away from the undiffracted beam. If you try to make your object too large, what you'll notice is that the reconstructions interfere with each other. They're on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
That is actually what controls how large you can make your reconstructed image.
Mm-hmm.
The limitations of this, you can't make an arbitrarily large image because the resolution of your photographic plate or of your laser, your transparency here, controls how large your reconstruction can be.
Mm-hmm.
Within that size, you can't put I use relatively simple objects made of dots, letters, and things like that. I have in the past actually taken a medical image and I reconstructed that. But you can't take you shouldn't expect to take a 5 megapixel image from your from a new camera and see to make a hologram of that, because the difficulty is the laser.
But some will try. Some will try.
I'd be happy actually, because I'm sure that they'd push the system and we'll probably learn something from that.
Yeah, we'll learn how much the price of Advil is this week. That's what we'll learn. Go ahead.
The laser beam, as it goes through the transparency, is going to cover a certain number of pixels on the plate there.
Mm-hmm. That
is what controls how many points you can encode in your image. It's not a one-to-one correlation. You can assume some fairly low efficiency where the laser has to go through a handful of pixels at the plate just to reconstruct a single pixel on the object, because it's going to take the interference from several pixels in order to do enough constructive interference that you can actually see that with any intelligibility at the projection screen.
Mm-hmm.
These are just some of the things going through, as you look through the object and you say, compare the beauty of regular holography with this, somewhat crude type of experiment.
I think you're being unnecessarily hard on yourself with the criticism.
Well, it is a start,
Yeah.
And I definitely hope that it expands and that it improves, because I do think the technique has quite a lot of potential.
Absolutely. This is how it all starts.
Yeah, I think that in the years ahead, I would hope that things like as you mentioned, using an LCD as a mask, being able to do that dynamically.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe other materials that are invented would be able to do this. So we could actually see from as computers have increased sufficiently, so it is almost possible to do this in real time now. And you could actually, if you had a method of outputting that, you could have potentially real time digital holography.
Yeah, possibly an HD plasma screen.
It's something to think about.
Yeah, a small one, and once you have your images in place, you can actually just bring them all in frame by frame. Very similar to the way that the animation was done many years ago, frame by frame, into a QuickTime movie, and send that movie over to the LCD or the plasma screen, providing it has enough resolution at that point in time. And just have some animation run.
Exactly.
Have the letter A and B spin around one another, or something simple like that at first.
Exactly. Yeah. You could. There's certainly. There's a lot that can be done. In some ways, I'm amazed at how slow it's gone. When you consider that the first computer-generated holograms that I found, and when you look through the literature, are probably back in the 70s. Perhaps even the late 60s. I think there might be Lee Seberg might have a paper in 1969, and so that's a long time. But on the other hand, we have gotten to the point where you take a look at the technology. Initially, the first ones were incredibly crude, and now and then they ran for weeks, and now the technology really has caught up. So maybe we'll see some large improvements over the next few years.
Now look at how long of a time span went from the first crude hologram in '48 with the what was it, sodium vapor lamp or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how it's amazing when you think about the development of the laser in general. It's a nice, an incredible piece of technology.
If you're interested in experimenting with any of those screens, Radio Shack was offering a little device that allowed you to put one of the SD cards in and go through a series of pictures. I think the screen may be, I don't know, it looks to me to be maybe 4x4 or something like that. And they were originally offering it for $139, and it didn't move. No one bought it, but they put it on sale for $49. So I just picked a couple of those up. And to take them apart and use the screens.
Absolutely, and I've noticed on your site you've also been using a Proxima overhead projection screen.
Yeah, that's working out very nice.
Is it?
Yeah.
That I think is a great idea. And unfortunately, as projectors, LCD projectors tend to be taking over, and people aren't using overheads as much, I find that those projection screens are only really available on eBay now.
Yeah, and cheap.
Yeah.
Compared to what they were going for when they were being offered.
Yeah, and some of those are fairly high resolution. Yeah, 1280 by 1024.
Yeah, but not enough for your application, though.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Although, as I mentioned, though, if someone does have access to some non-standard output devices, they can probably do some incredible stuff with this program. If you had access to an electron lithographer, if you have access to a slide. To a professional printing device,
or even one of the older laser typesetters, like a Linotronic or something.
Yep. Exactly.
Laser Image Center. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be interesting to hear if anyone gets a chance to try that.
Yeah. All right. Well, Alan, I want to thank you. Is there anything you'd like to tell the listeners about some of the work that you do? Maybe plug something for yourself here. Your program's free.
I'm sorry. What's that?
Your program is free, right?
The program is free, and the reason I make it free is because I've been very fortunate. I've had lots of people give me lots of education, through the years, and I'd like to just give back a piece of that to the community. I mean, when I was back originally, when I was doing my holography science fair projects, it was hobbyists and academics who just open themselves up. And if I had a question, I would just ask, and without consideration of compensation or anything like that, people share information.
Yeah.
And so I notice on your site also, which I greatly appreciate, that you have the same spirit of that, sharing the information, and it makes everyone that much better off.
Yeah, makes most of them better off anyway.
Yeah, I hope that
there are fans and there are detractors at all times.
Yes, yes.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I want to thank you for coming on the show and taking time to talk this late at night.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Okay, and we'll get this up Sunday night, get the announcement out, and it'll be ready for everyone first thing Monday.
Great, I look forward to that.
Okay.
At some point, I would like to talk to you further about some other projects.
Oh, at some point we'll have to get together, because I come down to South Jersey a lot. I was just down in Pennsauken last weekend.
Were you?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
At a big restaurant down there. It's on Airport Circle. It's called The Pub.
Yep, that's probably about 20 minutes from here.
Yeah, and the main dining hall holds 500 people.
Right.
Yeah, it's really it was really an experience.
Cook the food.
Yeah, exactly. There's like 6 charcoal pits that they work right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a real nice experience.
Yeah. If you are down, I have I think I mentioned this before. I do actually have a Proxima screen hooked up to a device where I built a piece of hardware to shift the plate I have a worm drive on it, so I can shift it by a certain amount a distance. And I'd like to. It would be a collaboration. I think on that would probably move much faster.
Yeah, and you were the guy that had the ground glass screen on the wrong side, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So from that time, I actually got the chance to purchase a new Proxima screen, higher resolution. I got another piece of glass cup for it, and I went over to my lapidary store, got my carbon grid, and made a new piece of ground glass. Put it in, and then I find that I've been drawn to so many other projects. I haven't gotten a chance to see how it works.
Oh, I'll have to come down and do that, and maybe take a trip over to Edmonds.
Yeah, it'll be well worth it.
Have lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's plan on that.
Excellent.
All right.
Well, give me a call when you're, or send me an email when you find that you might be in the area.
Yeah, I'll be on the road next week, and then of course it's Thanksgiving week after that.
Sure.
And I'm heading down to Florida for some classes down in Florida in Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. And of course then it's Christmas after that, because that'll be like the beginning of December. So let's see if we can set something up, maybe the beginning of January or something. But if something turns up with like a weekend in there, where would weekends be better for you or a weeknight?
I'm fairly flexible at this point.
Yeah.
I really am.
Okay.
And, yeah. So whichever, whenever.
All right, Alan. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.